The problem with Oppenheimer isn't just that it's too long, it's that it's too dense. This is a movie that never shuts up. If somebody isn't talking, the music is swelling to another maudlin crescendo. Often music and dialogue are stitched together in a kind of Frankenstein's monster of auditory overload. The film is like a sentence with too many clauses, with too many ideas jumbled together. One minute Oppenheimer is romancing Emily Blunt, the next she's a vicious drunk, the next they're giving away their kid. Information is poured on the viewer's head. There's hardly a line of dialogue, hardly a piece of music that isn't designed to hold the viewer's hand, to tell them exactly what to feel at any given moment. For instance, maybe you're just not quite convinced of just how super smart and important Oppenheimer was. Well, fortunately, there's an astounding amount of dialogue in which other characters reassure not just him, but we the audience of that very fact, spoken with remarkable historical foresight.
Because this is the most important thing to ever happen in the history of the world.
Were you perhaps confused about how this exchange between Emily Blunt and Jason Clarke was supposed to make you feel? Well, never fear, because here's the musical score to tell you.
You don't have to answer that yes or no. You can answer that any way you wish.
I know that, thank you. It's your question. It's not properly phrased.
Do you understand what I'm getting at?
I do.
Why don't you answer it that
Because
way?
I don't like your phrase.
You see, her character wasn't completely underdeveloped at all. She's actually super epic and cool and strong-willed. Each mumbled exposition dump is underwritten by another pensive soundscape. Each moment in Oppenheimer's life, the score insists, is absolutely pregnant with all the gravity of history. Nolan's greatest influence seems to be the BBC's Planet Earth series, piling on the viewer with the same dreamy sort of audiovisual collage, but lacking the visceral appeal of either a gazelle in slow motion or David Attenborough's warm, dulcet tones. Using music to bolster a scene, to help cultivate a certain mood, or to build tension is of course all well and good. The problem is that Oppenheimer's score is so relentless, it's as if Nolan doesn't have enough faith in either his actors or in his own writing to go without it. And granted, he might have good reason to feel that way. At times, it does seem like Nolan is relying on the music to try and distract or cover up for dialogue that is fundamentally clunky and unemotive. I do think some of the acting suffers under Nolan's direction. Cillian Murphy, while he does make for a striking physical presence, never quite sold me on his Oppenheimer voice, which, however like the real Oppenheimer it might be, does ground his performance in a kind of cardboard dinner theater style quality. Emily Blunt, as already mentioned, is more or less wasted, and special mention goes to Benny Safdie, who is distractingly bad. Oppenheimer ends on a note of warning, as the man admits to Einstein he may have doomed the world, haunted by visions of a planet set ablaze by nuclear devastation. Here is our modern Prometheus, the man who stole fire from the gods and is doomed to be chained to a rock and pecked at by an eagle for all eternity. It's an evocative scene, with Cillian Murphy's gaunt, tormented expression doing a lot of the heavy lifting. But then, as with Emily Blunt's verbal jousting against Jason Clarke, the scene feels like Nolan trying to brute force a reaction through sheer sensory overload rather than arriving somewhere through story and character. If the note Nolan wants to leave the viewer on is one of guilt, horror, and existential dread, it might have left more of a mark had he not spent so much time on trials and security hearings. After all, Oppenheimer's reputation or his persecution seems pretty insignificant when compared to total nuclear devastation. Any true sense of existential dread is also neutered by the fact that the actual effects of the bomb are always kept at arm's length. This is not to say, as some people have, that the film is obligated to include a Japanese perspective, but the fact remains that it becomes much harder to communicate the most potent horrors of the bomb without ever looking at the people on whom it was dropped. Throughout the film, the effects of the bomb remain largely conceptual, left to post-traumatic visions and off-screen slideshows, while Oppenheimer's guilt and his grief are the raw emotional material the viewer is meant to cling to. But then this is almost the inverse of what we might consider the emotional core of Atomic Dread, or an effective dramatization of it. The extent to which Oppenheimer might have felt guilt or grief are, historically speaking, the more speculative element, whereas the devastation devastating effects of the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki are much less so. A single photo of one of the people who the bomb was dropped on inspires much more introspection about the nature of the bomb than a 3-hour movie about the man who created it. Taken altogether then, Oppenheimer falls short as both the study of a man and as a study of his creation. It's a film that tries to be and say too many things at once, but in doing never says any of them very well. In a sense, the film isn't just the biography of Oppenheimer, but of Nolan himself. This is a director who approaches film with the same scientific zeal, but who also has trouble seeing the whole picture, and who even his most vocal champions acknowledge his films as a sort of compromise. Sure, maybe his films are too exposition heavy. Sure, maybe you can't hear some of the dialogue. And sure, maybe his characters are mostly one-dimensional. But then there's big explosive action scenes, and there's always some new elaborate novelty like going into people's dreams or time running back. Nolan's reputation is as a filmmaker who really makes you think, and yet I can't help but wonder if, like Oppenheimer, Nolan only has the reputation he does because all the Einsteins of his craft have left the building. Nolan's reputation thrives in a cinematic landscape dominated by paint-by-number superhero franchises, and in an industry shaken by dwindling box office returns. The success of Oppenheimer the film, like the brilliance of Oppenheimer the man, seems to me as having much more to do with circumstance or necessity than anything else. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.